People of Earth. People of Earth. We're coming to take over your schools. Boy, that's a long one. Okay. The UFOs are, it's the alien landing, attack of the pandemic pods on random assignment. Your hosts, Corey DeAngelis and...
Look at your phone up to the mic.
Exactly. Will be... It's an attack. It's like the 1950s when, you know, they had movies about... Anyway. Okay, so... That's the attack of the pandemic pods. Welcome to Random Assignment, everybody. I'm Bob Bowden. You see, I'm human, as is Corey DeAngelis, allegedly human. And Corey, how are you? Well, I should begin with a question. Are you human?
I don't know. I've been accused of having a team of elves do most of my work. So maybe I'm half robot, half human. So maybe that, yeah, maybe I'm an alien. I don't know.
You are... indefatigable, as they say. And by the way, just as a program note, I have some iced tea. It's actually not iced tea. But it's tea. This is in case people think this is whiskey. I'm having throughout the program. This is basically iced tea without the ice. So I just wanted to clarify that. And one other thing too, I promised in the last program that I started by complimenting you too much, and you
don't do that. You got to put me down, man.
And I promised the viewers I would begin by insulting you on this episode. So I would just like to say to the viewers that my co-host Corey DeAngelis is a loser,
darn,
a nitwit, a knucklehead, a kook.
Doesn't know what he's talking about half the time.
An idiot, a blithering fool. That's the man you're seeing on your screen. Well, that one. Yeah, that one. Anyway, so there's the insult. I've delivered as promised.
I went to government-run schools for my whole K through 12 education.
There you go.
What can I say?
Okay, so Corey, why did we start with an attack of the pandemic pod graphic and those convincing sound effects?
I don't know. I'm a loser. I don't understand these things. But no, I mean, there have been a lot of families getting together almost organically. You can almost call it spontaneous order or a form of emergent order where families are realizing that they need to do something themselves because the government isn't going to provide them with the type of adequate education that they've been used to for a very long time, which includes educational services, but it also includes having a place for your child to go each day while you go out to work. So families have been coming through Facebook groups and otherwise.
And this word pods, people have been using suddenly the word pods has proliferated through the nation.
Yeah, they're calling it pandemic pods if you're really hip and you are down with the new lingo of what's going on. But people have been doing this for a long time already. This is just kind of the new word for it. But it's you can call it micro schools. Essentially, the idea is you outsource the task of homeschooling to another household so that you can still go to work and someone can still watch your kid each day and provide them with some type of educational environment. So the main idea is you get 5 to 10 kids in a household and you have someone there to guide their learning or to teach them throughout the day and to watch them. So,
and even the venerable program Good Morning America thought we're going to use the word pods to describe what's going on here.
Yeah, so check out this video actually that came out from Good Morning America. And I will say they do identify a potential problem here, but for some reason they do not see the obvious solution to the problem. Let me check it out. This should be, tell me if I'm wrong, because I'm trying to guess the correct video.
We're going to turn now to our GMA cover story. With parents worried about sending their kids back to school, some are banding together and creating so-called smaller pandemic pods. But some experts say this approach is increasing inequality in education. It's a story we first saw in the Washington Post. And Ariel Reshef joined us with more. Good morning, Ariel.
Hey, good morning to you, Michael. The Washington Post calls these pandemic pods the 2020 version of a one-room schoolhouse, smaller classes with a private teacher. Some parents now leaning into a new and often pricier strategy for learning.
This morning, the desperate search for a solution to school, leading some parents to consider so-called pandemic pods.
So the idea of pods is not about eliminating risk, but it's about managing risk. Your children would get together with a limited and stable set of other people on a regular basis. That provides some socialization, it provides some structure.
Gathering small groups of students and paying for a private teacher.
Our goal is to help parents and caregivers and teachers figure out something that's going to work.
Leon Chicago Chang co-created the Facebook group Pandemic Pods and Micro Schools.
The situation suddenly escalated a couple of weeks ago when school districts started signaling in a much more serious way that they were not going to be able to physically open their doors to children in the fall. How can we get together with other parents to try to help solve these problems together, share resources, share ideas, connect with other people?
But this approach can come with a high price tag. One tutoring company proposing a cost of $350 per week per child for 2 hours of instruction a day. Some education experts worry the high cost could be prohibitive for many students, reinforcing existing inequities in education.
Parents should have the options and the choices to do whatever they think is best for their children. We've always known that wealthy families have lots of choice in the school choice debate.
Chicago Chang says these pods are a way to mitigate risks and give kids a chance to socialize and learn together.
Oh, man. First of all, I love that Annette Anderson there. But how did you like the reporter in that traditional television reporter cadence at the beginning of the piece before introducing the video saying, this is a new and often pricier strategy for learning.
Oh my God!
Strategy. $350 per month per kid would be $3,500 per 10 months per kid. So that would be essentially a school year for $3,500. She describes as a pricier strategy. Now I know. I guess the point is the parents are paying out of pocket, and they're not. Of course, they're paying taxes, but they think of traditional public schools as free. So I guess this would be considered more than they normally are pulling out of the pocket.
I mean, we spend over $15,000 per child per year in traditional public schools. That's about, if you take it over 40 weeks, which is the normal school year, that's $375 per child per week. That would be more than enough to cover these even expensive pandemic pods that they're talking about in the San Francisco Bay Area. The one Facebook group they were talking about, I just checked it out before we got on here. They actually already have 13,000 families that have already come together in that group in just, I think, less than 2 weeks. Yeah. And they grew by at least 9,000 in the last week alone. So this is a lot of families coming together. It's a private group too. So anyone can't just click on it just to join. You have to, click on it and get accepted to join. So that's a very large number of families getting together to find these alternative options. But look, it's really important that we take on this myth that it's, this idea that pandemic pods themselves are what leads to inequality. And you saw Washington Post wrote about this, and they identified a potential problem. So did Good Morning America, Yahoo News. They're saying that this could lead to more inequities because more advantaged families will be the most likely to be able to afford these alternative options. That's true, but then they don't propose the obvious solution, which is to allow the funding to follow the child, more than enough money to cover these costs. And The way I've put it is $15,000 per child. Let's just say that's the number on average. 10 children in a household, that's $150,000 in revenues. Even if only 2/3 of that went to the teacher, that'd still be $100,000 for the teacher. It would benefit the teacher, and it would benefit families as well. But because we live in this system where the funding goes to the school building, regardless of whether it opens or provides an adequate education to families, the families are getting the short end of the stick.
Corey, is your camera out of focus a little bit?
Yeah, I saw that.
It's blurry.
It might be because it's raining a lot here in DC. Is it still blurry? Let me.
Yeah. Do you have a focus adjustment actually, maybe it's. How
about now?
That looks a little better, actually. All right, good. I'm just looking out for our viewers. Yeah, it does look better.
I'll close the thing and then it'll readjust.
Yeah. I
Boom.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
I couldn't tell if my contacts were blurry, if it was the screen that I was seeing. Blurry.
Okay. So this big thing has come up about inequality, this hand wringing. Oh my goodness, inequality. And we were talking about it at remotely at Choice Media with some of the other folks that work with us, and we kind of got deep into it. It is a really interesting thing. But first, can we show what our friend Lindsay Burke had written about that? She calls it fundamentally reshaping K-12 education. And this would be in a positive way, unlike that piece you just saw from the week that was reprinted by Yahoo News. But yeah, if you scroll down a bit, you can kind of see her take on it. again, pods. She's also using the word pods. There's Lindsay. And yes, she describes what we say. It's small groups going to homes to use a lot of online tools. And yes, it's a lot like the one-room schoolhouse, et cetera. And it just talks about how people can, the kids learn at their own pace. The kids often to mentor each other and help teach each other. A lot of times younger kids will listen to an older kid much more than they'll listen to an adult. So this word pod has exploded this week. Perhaps the Washington Post writer initiated it. I'm not sure. But even some of the local newspapers are liking it. We saw in San Diego, and there's an ad.
Yeah,
Look at that. Parents are rushing to form the learning pods. This is a mainstream media, local newspapers saying, hey, this is popular. And then we kind of found out, we saw something that happened based on that. If you look at this, look, someone set up their own WordPress website.
Boom.
Read that subtitle. We created this is just a couple parents to help connect families looking for in-home. They're doing this on their own, Corey. They're doing it without leadership from the state Department of Education telling them how to do the website and how to structure it. This is done as an entrepreneurial endeavor.
It's a beautiful lesson in spontaneous order. If you have any George Mason University economists on this podcast, they'll understand what that means. But it's essentially that, societies will organize things themselves if there's a need there. And look, there's a need here, obviously, and we're seeing it. People on the ground in local communities are doing it outside of the government spontaneously. And this is a form of emergent order, which I think economics professors will be teaching for years to come in their classrooms.
Yeah, they're connecting the families that want to find a teacher. They're connecting the teachers that want to be involved in helping the kids. And they're very hyper-local in just one area. Mm-hmm. And you could certainly imagine this kind of thing proliferating widely. And I know, Corey, you know a lot about this particular micro school called Prenda in Arizona. We've talked about it on this podcast before. I became interested in them last year, and we covered it on Choice Media with a video. And we kind of thought this week it would be a good time to kind of show at least a little piece of that video again, because it kind of sets up what this one micro school in Prenda is doing. And so,
let's check it out. This is Prenda CEO Kelly Smith should be in this video. Let's check it out.
As we talk to parents, we're able to help them see that school could be something different. It could be.
MIT grad Kelly Smith got the idea to invent a new kind of micro school. So he did. It's called Prenda, and its growth in Arizona has been explosive.
I talked to my friends who had children and trusted me, and they pulled their kids out of school and sent them to my house every day, and we created a micro school, 7 children at the time. One of them was mine.
The first thing to know about Prenda is its growth trajectory. From that first group of just 7 kids, on a semester-by-semester basis, enrollment went to 20, then 30, then over 500. By the start of next year, they're expecting 1,000. The next thing to know is their rather untraditional school facilities.
We are in my house, right here. And also we are at my children's school. Not just my children, 8 additional children in addition to my 2 girls.
It's kind of a hybrid between homeschool and traditional school. You get the socialization, you get the curriculum like a traditional school, but you get the homeschool feel.
Each Prenda school has only 5 to 10 students, and to some who work there, it represents the education version of a larger techno-cultural trend.
Think about Uber and the fact that it allows a normal person to own a taxi, and you think about Airbnb and the way it allows a normal person to own a hotel. Prenda allows a normal person to run a school.
My son's class previously was like 35 kids to 1 teacher, so it's quite the drastic extremes that way.
I was a regular public school teacher, and then I became a guide at Prenda, and I went from having 150 students to having 9, which is incredible. And in the first week, I was able to meet with every student one-on-one to curate and create curriculum that was at their level, which was something I've never been able to do in my teaching career.
All right. So my favorite soundbite in that Rochelle, my friend I met doing that piece, is that you think of Uber, and that's a normal person being able to run a taxi. You think of Airbnb, and that's a normal person being able to run a hotel. Prenda as a normal person being able to run a school. And but what I wanted to pose to you, Corey, and this is what I was talking about before, is this question of inequity. Okay, so the pushback on this is that it might cause more disparity between academic performance between kids. And it is an interesting thing to think about. One could make the argument, I think, that when you do have these structured military-like institutions called traditional public schools that cram all these kids into 30 kids in a classroom and they sit in rows of desks or however they sit, but that it probably maybe does force a certain degree of uniformity in the learning pace, that once you do free people to learn at their own pace in things that truly interest them, that there are a lot that will exceed and do really well and learn much more and be much happier, as we covered in that story. But maybe the natural disparities will be larger, that there's something that when you do kind of consolidate everybody and make it rigid and commodify it in this big structural machine called traditional public schools, that one of the things it does do is reduce disparity, which I'm not saying is always great. What do you think about that? Maybe when you do free people up, there are more disparities.
Well, one, it's not a good thing to be all equally failing in a traditional system. That's not a good thing. I mean, equality in and of itself is not a good thing. We want everybody to be better off. So if you're all equally at zero, that's not a good thing. But that's even worse than that with the public school system, because public schools are inherently unequal. You have differences in funding across district lines. You have differences. You have lots of racial and income-based segregation in the current public school system. You have disparities in outcomes in the public school system. So I don't buy it that microschooling itself is the cause of educational disparities. I think the problem is that families right now that are the most advantaged have the best ability to seek out these microschools and to be able to pay for them out of pocket. And the people that are being harmed the most by the schools not reopening are the least advantaged families that do not have the money to cover these expenses. And so if you want more equity, again, the way to solve that problem is to fund the families directly, give them some portion of those dollars. Maybe it's not $15,000, maybe it's $12,000. You could afford a lot of these services, and it won't only be the most advantaged that are being able to form microschools. You'll have a more equal society if you fund the student instead of the system.
But my take on it is that reducing disparity is the wrong goal, because there are all kinds of different forms of success and types of success. And to crush it all into sort of one linear line of kind of measurement of I guess one reading score, one math score is a bad idea in that kind of creative pursuit regard. And that if I had a bad kidney and you had great kidneys, the problem would not be our disparity in kidney function. It's that I have a bad kidney. If I needed a knee replacement because it hurts for me to walk and you walked great and you could run great, it's not our disparity in knee quality that's the problem. It's that my knee is bad. So I think focusing on disparities is bad in many ways. It's not. It oversimplifies education into this linear continuum, which is an absurd way to think of it. And that furthermore, we should be focusing on lifting everybody.
Well, yeah, a lot of people will make similar arguments, and they'll say, "Oh, we need to abolish private schools, make private schools illegal because advantaged families are going out and they're paying for private schools and they're they're excluding themselves from others in society." But I mean, it's one way to improve this metric of equality, is to force everybody into the public school system. But another way to do it is to allow people to have more options, like you said, to lift everybody up. And I think, yes, the best way to strive for equal opportunity is to be able to provide for more opportunities instead of squashing those opportunities. Because again, even if you outlawed private schools, these families are still going to have tutoring, private tutoring. They're still going to be able to access these things. And so you're just kind of creating other problems that you're not,
you're right about that. But even in some alternate reality where the real goal is we're all equal, that would be the greatest thing ever if we could just all be equal. Let's all agree that the easy way to do that is just dumb down the smart kids. Like that, then we could make everybody dumb them all down. Then we could all be equal, and as if that would be like an awesome world, right?
Hey, Bob, you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. Are you there? Hello? Oh, looks like Corey's frozen up on my computer, folks. I don't know if you're seeing him or seeing me. Huh.
Okay,
Hello?
now I'm back. I'm back.
Oh, there he is.
I think it was my computer. I have so many windows open. But yes,
Okay.
I get your point, and especially when it's only in one metric, right? When it's just we're focusing so much on the standardized test score. That's another reason why I don't like focusing on these assessments so much. I think the best measure, if we're going to use one, should be satisfaction of the families, and what better way to do that than to fund them directly? And so, real quick before we move to the next, wanted to bring up Prenda's website if anybody wants to check it out. It's prendaschool.com, and I do my favorite part of that video, similar to Bob's, was when the person said, look, it's kind of like Airbnb of education. And there's another thing I encourage people to look at. It's called unschool.school, which is essentially also like the Airbnb or Uber of education, in that, it connects educators, providers of the educational service, to the families, the consumers of the educational service, by having an app where families can go and select these educational services. So that's another thing I would recommend going and checking out, unschool.school. It's kind of the frontier, kind of like Prenda micro schools of education.
Okay, so while that part is happening, the pod word proliferating widely, people are worried about it, other people praising it, we have this really probably bigger thing happening, which is, again, more debate over how and when to reopen traditional public schools, and a bigger and bigger chasm and fighting over it. So a whole bunch of things to tell you about this. First, there was a bill, the Democrats in Congress wanted to, as you see there, prevent tying federal funds to reopening. And the piece reads, though the focus on the Trump administration threats to cut off funding to K-12 schools that choose to not reopen, a spokesman for Senator Mark Warner said a bill being introduced by the Democrat from Virginia would also make it crystal clear funding cannot be taken away from higher education. Oh, this is higher education institutions? Did we post the wrong thing? Decisions about school openings should be made by local health officials, parents, teachers, not Betsy DeVos or Donald Trump, Warner tweeted last week. I'll be introducing a bill to make it crystal clear they don't have the authority to cut off funding for local schools. Okay, that looks like K-12 during COVID-19. And so this is a thing you've been talking about a lot, Corey, about the question of, you like to say when people, when and we're going to see a lot of stories in a second about teachers saying, I don't feel safe, or the union saying we're going to sue to keep the brick and mortar from reopening. You are fond of saying, no problem, that's fine. Just give the money to the parents then.
Yes.
We're cool with you opting out of this system, right? That's
you should not have to return to work. No one should be forced to do anything. No schools should be forced to do anything from the top down, from the government. Each individual school should have that decision whether to reopen. The teachers should have the decision to go back to work or not. But the families need some choices too.
But the question is, should those teachers be paid or should they not be paid?
I mean, and look,
if they don't go to work,
the districts can make their decisions with however they're allocating their dollars. I'm not going to make that decision for them. But the funding needs to go to the families if the schools are not reopening. And I think even if the schools did reopen, regardless, the funding should go to the families. But I like to compare it to, grocery stores, like I always do, that if your neighborhood Walmart doesn't reopen, well, it's inconvenient, but it doesn't destroy your livelihood, and it's not devastating because you can take your money elsewhere. You can take, even if you're using taxpayer funds through food stamps, you can take it to Whole Foods or Trader Joe's. Yeah. Pell Grants at the higher education level, your community college isn't open, you can take those Pell Grants to a different university.
So what we're seeing though in the kind of real world scenario of today that's happening is a bunch of unions not just making demands, but suing to keep the brick and mortar schools from opening. And so let's start with a clip from Florida. Actually, the video clip from Florida.
Let's see. Is it? Give me a thumbs up if it's the right one.
We are now putting forth guidelines that say school. Today,
no. we can do it in any order, but
so many videos.
I know. It's
maybe this one.
Florida's largest teachers union is suing Governor DeSantis and the Education Department over the state's emergency order to reopen classrooms 5 days a week. Attorneys for the Florida Education Association call the order reckless, unreasonable, and unconstitutional. News4 Jax has reporters covering several updates on the pandemic. We begin with Joe McLean, who is here with more on this new legal challenge. Joe.
Yeah, some strong words from the plaintiffs in this lawsuit at a press conference today, a virtual press conference. The FEA, along with several teachers and parents, now demanding the governor and the education commissioner rescind that emergency order issued earlier this month. The lawsuit says that allowing schools to restart brick and mortar classes is risking lives.
Our state government, starting with our governor, has not gotten this virus under control. Maybe we went back too early. Maybe we were reckless with beaches. Maybe we were reckless with bars. Maybe we were reckless with restaurants, but we cannot be reckless with public schools.
A lawsuit is now challenging Education Commissioner Richard Corcoran's emergency order that all Florida schools provide an in-person learning option for students this fall. The suit cites the spike in COVID-19 cases and a sustained double-digit percentage of new positive cases.
No developed nation sent their school children back to school with this level of virus. And frankly, the fact that one has to sue a state to do what Texas just did last week, what California did last week, is mind-boggling to me.
The suit names Governor Ron DeSantis, Corcoran, and the Department of Education, as well as the mayor of Miami-Dade County, one of the hardest hit parts of the Sunshine State. Supporters of the lawsuit say state leaders were politically motivated to issue that reopening order and that it directly goes against data from health agencies like the CDC.
It shows a depraved indifference to human life that we are having this conversation in Florida right now.
Tonight, the education commissioner responding to the lawsuit, saying in part, quote, this emergency order did not order any new directives regarding the requirements of schools to be open. It simply created new innovative options for families to have the choice to decide what works best for the health and safety of their student and family.
So that is, first of all, I really wanted to check Randi Weingarten's statement. I dispute that a little bit. She says no other country has opened schools with virus at this level. I want to crunch the number on the percentage of Floridians with COVID-19, just out of curiosity. A lot of people are fast and loose with that data. But what were you going to say?
What's crazy to me is they tried to compare it to the bars reopening and the grocery stores reopening. Well, dude, the difference is when the grocery store doesn't reopen, I don't have to pay that grocery store anymore. I get to keep that money and I can order online, or I can go to another grocery store. If the bar doesn't reopen, I can go to the liquor store down the street and buy some alcohol if I really need it. I can go to a different bar that decides to reopen. So we understand if you don't want to go back and you don't want to reopen a certain way, and some families would be okay with that, and they'd still enroll in the virtual educational option. But look, you shouldn't get to keep their money. Walmart shouldn't get to keep my money if they don't reopen.
That's it. They all want to be paid the same for a service that is nowhere close to being the same. So that's part of it too. You don't hear that in the piece. In fact, they don't usually bring it up. The reporters don't even mention and by the way, the teachers union want 100% of the funding, that 100% of the paychecks they've gotten for all they got last year for service that's nowhere close to it. But just to show you the divide on this, we also got California's Gavin Newsom, the governor there, in a kind of a very different kind of presentation where he said they're going to pick out different counties, and if you're on a certain list of counties, then the counties can decide for themselves whether to reopen. And it was somewhat different. I love to hate Gavin Newsom, by the way, but this sounds a
little better, right?
It's a little better, but let's hear it.
You know what, Bob? You've been talking about this for freaking months on Random Assignment. This has been your solution that we should allow the localities to choose. Before we play the Gavin Newsom clip, I want to point out my response to that previous video in tweet form.
Oh, good.
If these don't reopen, you can take your money elsewhere. Grocery stores, restaurants, daycare, colleges, retailers, pre-K institutions. But if your child's school doesn't reopen, then why can't you take your education dollars elsewhere? That's the $1 million question.
With that Corey DeAngelis dubious emoticon or whatever we're calling that, of that questioning. Yes, exactly. Which I have now stolen from you, by the way, except I don't think I owe you royalties because I don't think you invented it. But anyway, I now occasionally do that one too. I'm trying to be like Corey. But yeah, let's hear from Gavin Newsom.
We are now putting forth guidelines that say schools can physically open for in-person education when the county that they're operating in has been off our monitoring list for 14 consecutive days. If you've tuned into these daily briefings, you're very familiar with our monitoring list. I'll be updating that list later in the presentation today. But we are now putting forth guidelines that say, based on the data, based upon the background spread, the community spread of the virus, that if you are not on that monitoring list, you can move forward as a county if you choose to physically open your campus, physically open your schools. However, schools that don't meet this requirement, they must begin the school year this fall through distance learning.
Yeah, maybe I gave him a little too much credit. His list doesn't tell anybody they have to open. It basically just says, okay, well, some can open and others we will insist they don't open. So that's not quite as good. But anyway, if you could just hit a couple of the links quickly, Corey. There's one from Wisconsin on, and I believe that's this one. Yep, teachers union in largest districts want virtual education only in the fall. Same thing with Connecticut, the teacher union demanding that reopening being done their way, essentially. Calls for weekly COVID testing, guaranteed state fundings before reopening schools, and all these things. You know, we're the real secret managers of the schools. We're the teachers union. And although other people are actually supposed to be running it, we're going to kind of, be inserting all of our rules. This is from Hawaii. Hawaii Teachers Union wants school reopening postponed. Look at that second line, calling for an indefinite delay to the starting of schools in Hawaii. And then we had a similar thing from the Chicago Teachers Union. Look at that, call for an all remote start to the fall. So part of it is, I'm hearing some people say, well, this is great, Corey and Bob. Don't you see the traditional public schools, if what you guys want is more options, they are creating a scenario that we couldn't have ever dreamed of creating through advocacy. They are basically just telling America, like, we're not going to do the normal job, and so it's up to you to find new alternatives. They're basically doing our work for us. The other side of it is to say, yeah, at the same time, millions of kids will probably be left with options that maybe are not adequate in places that don't have vouchers or online learning programs in their states, et cetera. And they have and then maybe they don't have Prenda type micro schools, or maybe their parents are not engaged enough to have started that search, or they don't even know about it. And there are probably millions of kids, as I'm celebrating that you and me are, look, we're winning the school choice thing. The unions are handing it to us. The other side of it is that maybe millions of kids will learn next to nothing for the next 6 months. So I don't know how to frame this. What do you think about that? Oh, I have a feeling Corey, that's why I probably went full screen. I think Corey checked out again, hasn't he? All right. Well, anyway, I'm sure he'll be back, everybody. So let's keep going. So that was the Chicago Teachers Union did that. But then there was also a completely different take on reopening from the governor of South Carolina, Governor McMaster. He framed school reopening a very different way, where he came he had a press conference, and he came to the podium and he said, listen, it's going to all be up to the parents in this state. So every parent in South Carolina should have the choice of keeping their kid at home if you're worried about the virus and you're worried about the kid's health and transmission and the other kids. Every parent should decide to either have the right to either keep their kids home or send their kid to a brick and mortar school. And we're going to make our public school infrastructure handle and accommodate those parental decisions. And then the other part, then they began a Q&A part after he announced that. It's basically putting the kids and parents first, saying, look, this system will have to do what the parents want. That was the South Carolina governor. And then what he did is he took a Q&A, and there was a question from the press that was kind of one of these questions that you tend to get a lot from a lot of local media people, kind of a union-centric question, where what the reporter said was, well, but Governor, a lot of teachers are feeling underappreciated and they're feeling undercompensated. What do you say to them about, their fears of the virus? And the governor said, well, these teachers are in the same boat all the rest of us are in. He basically went on to explain, if you're a bus driver, you may have fears of the virus, but you have to go to work. If you work as a policeman or a fireman or a nurse in a hospital, or all kinds of other jobs, you may have also have concerns about the virus, and you have to go to work anyway. You put on a mask, you take the certain precautions. But just because you have some fears of the virus, the governor answered, doesn't mean that, all these other categories of jobs get to not work until you decide you're safe. They have to go to work anyway, is what I'm trying to say. Whereas teachers, we're going to carve out an exception for them, where if they're at all concerned, they get to be paid for whether they work or not. But all of the nurses and police officers and doctors and all kinds of other people who work at supermarkets and drugstores, they all kinds of millions of other people in society have to work regardless of whether they are scared. So that was the governor's response.
Dude.
Yeah,
I'm
and then
back.
we that.
Oh my God, the street, I don't know. My internet was working, but I just restarted my computer and it worked. But I'm back. Sorry,
I bored the audience with that, but I actually just explained the whole South Carolina thing. But if you could just hit the South Carolina clip, the two clips, 1 and 2, they'll see more what I was talking about.
On it.
This is the governor.
Today, I'm calling on all the public school districts to submit reopening plans that give parents the option to send their children back to school 5 days a week. Or parents can choose to keep their children home and receive virtual instruction. We must give parents the choice. This is the only thing that we're asking these districts to do today, is to give the parents the choice. The parents are looking to our schools. The parents pay taxes for the schools. The Constitution provides for schools. We must see that the children have these schools available. If the parent wants to send their child back to school, they should be able to do so, and to do so with confidence. If the parents want to keep the child at home, they should be able to do that and do it with confidence. Each district must allow the parents to make that choice for their children. I ask our superintendent, Molly Spearman, not to approve any district plan that doesn't give parents the choice to send their children to classroom face-to-face instruction.
So we don't have time for 50 states, but I think what we've done is laid out something pretty clear where the difference is. Where in Florida, what they said was all schools must open. And what they said in California is we're going to have a list, and if you're on a list to be approved, then you get to decide whether to open. And in South Carolina, it's the most freedom of all for parents, where the governor says we're not going to tell we're going to say all schools have to open, but parents will also have the option for virtual if they want that option. Florida government didn't say that. So that's so that's like a completely different approach. So all of these states, in other words, are applying these different approaches, and there you have a tweet.
Yeah, I don't know if you covered this, but yeah, they took some of the CARES Act funding and it's going to funding families. And Oklahoma did something similar. Their governor just announced that they're also going to do scholarships for families out of the CARES Act funding. And everybody knows I'm not for federal involvement, but the money's already sitting there in the state's hands. Might as well go to the individual families directly. So here's two states that are doing something that would benefit families.
Right.
And should I get to the second clip from South Carolina?
This is a Q&A, which I found interesting. Go ahead.
Governor, it's no secret recently teachers, General Assembly have had a tenuous relationship. They're already at a shortage. They already feel like they're underpaid and underappreciated. And now you're asking them to at least have the option to go back in a dangerous pandemic. What's your response to teachers who are scared about their health and also their loved ones?
Well, I think everyone's scared about their health. That's why, and about everyone else's health. That's why we're all wearing masks. That's why we're standing here at distances. We're all in the same boat. There's no special group. The only ones that are really in a special group are the elderly and those with those conditions, and a lot of people in the poorer parts of our state. And we concentrated on that. We understand that, and that's why we're doing the things that we're doing in nursing homes and otherwise.
I love that guy. We're all in the same group. There is no special group. What they wanted, what that reporter wanted him to say is, actually, teachers are a special group because we're going to make nurses work whether they like it or not, and we're going to make trained
police
conductors, probably not too many. Pardon?
Police officers too.
Yeah, police officers, doctors, nurses. I gave the list a second ago. We're going to make all those people work whether they like it or not. If you're a policeman, you got to work whether you like it or not. But teachers, no, we don't want to make them work whether they like it or not. They're a special group. And here the governor says, no, there are no special groups. So that's really the key to what this debate was from my point of view. Meanwhile, so you have all these states bickering about different kinds of, with their local populations and teachers unions about different ways to reopen. And after all that, you then had a White House press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany, being asked about this and responding to the whole thing. She talks about both school choice and reopening in one soundbite on Fox and Friends.
Wants the funding to be tied to the student. How that works mechanically, we'll see. But that is undoubtedly the priority, is for the student to receive the money, for the parent to have the choice and make sure if they have a neighboring district with a school open, they can send their child there, because it is paramount for a number of reasons, for the whole health of the child, for children who depend on school lunches and social services that schools provide, for parents. We know that there are many single moms that depend on schools for childcare, and we know educational disparities start to happen for low-income students in particular when schools aren't open. This is paramount. We've got to reopen our schools. The president's been unmistakable about it. There will be more than $70 billion in phase 4 for that very purpose.
She's been listening to Random Assignment every week.
Now that said,
there are student, not the system.
Yeah, there were some polls that came out. There was a poll that came out today I guess we can talk about that later. Speaking of Fox News Channel, though, our own Corey DeAngelis appeared this week on the Fox News Channel to talk about these issues of school choice.
And you know what's interesting is 2 shows ago on Random Assignment, we featured a clip of Steve Hilton talking about, if your schools aren't going to reopen, you should get your money back. And he started this whole thing of talking about getting your money back. And he had Jordan Sekulow on the show, talking about how families were filing lawsuits, or at least contacting him with legal inquiries to get their money back from the states using the courts, not even just through the legislatures. So that's interesting. And so between then and now, I've gotten in contact with Steve Hilton myself, and this was the clip from me on his show.
About that now with Director of School Choice at the Reason Foundation, Corey DeAngelis. Corey, look, I don't want to talk about the principle. We all agree school choice, great. I've been fighting for it. What I'm interested in hearing from you is just some sense of the options that are there. It's not just charter schools provided by local, enabled by local governments. Innovation and entrepreneurial activity is really giving parents lots of new and different options. Can you tell us about some of them?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Steve. And I just want to point out that families have been getting the short end of the stick when it comes to K through 12 education for far too long. And like you said, the lockdown situation and the school reopening debate has really made that clear now more than ever, because families are essentially powerless. And the way to fix that is to fund families directly, just like we do with a whole host of other taxpayer-funded initiatives, whether that comes to Pell Grants at the higher education level, GI Bill at the higher education level, pre-K programs. Also, that deals with education and food stamps. The money goes directly to families, and families can pick different providers of the service. And so we should do the exact same thing when it comes to K through 12 education. And if you like, we can even call it something like UBEI, Universal Basic Education Income. Have the funding go to the families, and we should fund students instead of school systems, just like we do with all these other programs.
Interesting to see both of you guys in T-shirts with jackets on. That's an interesting, Like I would, you don't see that often with 2 guests on a national cable news. Both wearing T-shirts.
No, it's funny. We cut the video off right before I got to actually answering his question. I kind of filibustered the.
It was the mother
minutes.
of all answers. I've never seen it. Was one answer for an entire segment. I've never seen anything like it. Anyway. Okay, and before we get off this thing, I know we've kind of belabored this thing about reopening, but you found this story about Gilbert Public Schools.
Oh, dude, this is nuts. This is the craziest thing I've ever seen. And ACLJ is actually, I believe, is interested in this case more than ever, because it seems like it's an unconstitutional. I mean, if you think about it, let's take a step back before we get to Gilbert. Schools not reopening and not providing that service to families can arguably be unconstitutional at the state level, because each state constitution requires the state to provide for some type of free public education for families. And some state educations even use the words, adequate or thorough or efficient educations need to be provided. It's kind of hard for them to make that argument if they're not even reopening. But let's look at Gilbert. This was crazy. They're actually in Arizona, just to give you the background, Doug Ducey, the governor, said that schools cannot reopen. They're not permitted to reopen until August 17th. But the school year was supposed to start August, beginning of August, maybe like August 3rd or something like that. So because schools are not allowed to reopen based on the executive order from the government, they're renaming schools child care facilities.
Oh, looks like we have another frozen Corey. Everybody. Oh, goodness. And he did the reboot, too. Normally, that would fix things. Well, anyway, so you can see there, yes.
And so they're reopening elementary schools, and
You're
they're
back.
saying,
Okay.
I'm back. So, yes, but they're saying, look, we're going to call these schools, that's the same buildings, the elementary schools, and we're going to call them, child care facilities. We're not going to give you the education part, but we will give you the child care part. And instead of giving you a rebate, we're going to charge you $160 per child per week for these services. So it's essentially extortion because they're charging the families twice. Imagine if a private school did that. If a private school said, "Oh, we can't open because we're schools, but hey, if you want to send your kids here, we're not going to give your tuition dollars back. But if you want to pay us again, then we'll watch your kids."
And in short, and you said this is Arizona, this Gilbert Public Schools?
Yes, and it's not just
Okay.
Gilbert Public Schools. There's Mesa Public Schools are doing the same thing. I think Mesa is charging $165 per child per week, and there's another school district that a parent sent me as well. But there's 3 off, that I know of already in Arizona that are doing this.
And I believe as our friend Jason Bedrick tweeted out about this, he said something like, so let me get this straight. The virus is too dangerous to educate kids. Okay, so bringing them into the school building to educate them would be too dangerous. So we're going to bring them into the school building and just have babysitting services. That, for some reason, is not too dangerous.
That's safe. That's okay.
And we'll charge you for that, even though we're already being paid our full-time amount anyway through the taxes. So we're going to charge extra for babysitting while it's too dangerous to do the ABCs.
This is just this. I mean, this to most people, they see this and this is just absolutely ridiculous. You're charging people twice for less services than you would have gotten otherwise. You're not getting the education part. Some schools may still provide, but look, and they're still doing it in the same locations. They're doing it in the elementary schools. They're just literally saying they're doing something
They'll probably
differently.
say, "Oh no, it'll be fewer kids, and we'll keep them farther away from each other." Or something.
The state constitution says that they need to provide a free public education. They're not doing that. They're charging families. So
let me actually say something, correct something I think I said a second ago, which it may have been wrong, because I was distinguishing South Carolina from Florida by saying that the South Carolina governor said we need to provide either virtual or brick and mortar to all parents, and I was separating that from Florida. Turns out Florida does have Florida Virtual School. So by saying Florida schools have to open, that automatically would be the same thing as South Carolina, which is every parent would have a virtual or a brick and mortar option. So my distinction between South Carolina and Florida was probably incorrect. They probably, sounds like they actually do have the same policy, very different from California. But anyway, so speaking, go ahead.
I was just going to point out that, and I had a map on this pulled up a second ago, but Jordan Sekulow went on Fox, on Sunday, and he brought up a map where 22 states have already had families file inquiries to ACLJ to get their money back from their states because their schools aren't reopening. And I'll have it in a second. Hundreds of families. It was hundreds of families, and he says now that it's closer to about 1,000 families here it is. So here's the map that they presented on Fox, but hundreds of legal inquiries received by ACLJ from 22 different states. And it's he said to me earlier that it's even closer to 30 states now and closer to 1,000.
You're saying these are parents or class action groups of parents saying, since our schools aren't reopening, we're going to sue the state.
Yeah, we want our money back. You're not providing that free public education, and you need to give me a voucher.
Let's go deeper into that next week.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Really good stuff. Yeah,
and that's what they're thinking about. I believe. I think they're thinking about pursuing something in Arizona as well related to that.
Okay. So let's go back though to South Carolina. You had said a second ago, you introduced the idea of the school choice part. Forget about the traditional public school. Now this is a private school choice program. The governor came out and said, hey, how about tuition grants, 32 million, I guess, which is our friend Jonathan Butcher had tweeted that out, happening now with an exclamation point and a photo. Look at this. The governor is announcing school choice scholarships. And so we went on to learn that this comes from governor's discretionary education account, which totals $48.5 million. It came from a federal CARES Act, which was the federal program for coronavirus relief. But then, just as we had kind of learned about that, we have late breaking news today that there had been a lawsuit to stop it. That's 3C. Actually, before we get that, can you do 3B, that tweet, that Elisa tweet? So this, I kind of thought this was, I wanted to get Corey to actually respond to this when I saw it. This was about that South Carolina private school choice.
What is she talking about?
Yeah, 32 million statewide is not that much anyway, I think, for a state. But anyway, but there you go. This is what institutional racism looks like, Corey. I want people like me read that and say, what does Corey DeAngelis think about it?
So I got two responses, and one's to a different tweet from a legislator in South Carolina. And he said, look, it's $32 million, $6,500 per student. We could have spent that in our public schools. It doesn't seem like we're getting our bang for our buck. So I went and looked up what they spend in the public schools per student, over double that amount, $13,600, $13,600 per student per year.
But Senator, you're dodging the question. This woman says this is what institutional racism looks like.
Well, no,
giving parents private school choice. What?
Yeah, no, she has it completely backwards. Trapping families in schools that aren't serving them, that are already highly segregated because of the district boundaries, and the funding's extremely unequal. And I don't know South Carolina in particular, but other reports have found this in the U.S. that funding's unequal in the.
You know what they say? They say that they use the private schools to self-segregate, and they'll be, all white and all black private schools or something like that, I guess. Anyway, the bottom line, the larger point. Go ahead.
There's 9 studies on this for private school choice programs, and 8 out of the 9 studies find on net private school voucher programs lead to racial integration. The one other study found no significant differences, but 8 out of the 9 studies positive.
I find that I respond the same way to you do, Corey. The idea that people suddenly people with immense segregation in traditional public school districts for decade after decade after decade, and you suddenly have a threat to that institutional cartel called public education, and now they're suddenly worried about segregation, while the absolute abject segregation is happening in the traditional public schools forever, and there seems to be zero concern about that. I can't even.
No, I mean, preventing funding from following families is more akin to institutional racism. It's built into the public school system, and people have tracked this for a very long time. But other people.
Okay, so let's get to the judge. Just the judge block. So we were just praising this governor, and guess what? A judge says, "Oh boy, we got to stop this thing. We can't let this get out of control." We
argument here? Like what?
I actually did not.
Saying?
Yeah, you want to scroll down? We can all learn together.
What's their
argument? Oh, this will be terrible. Let's see. Blocked the spending and they were the plaintiff alleging the spending of federal dollars. Oh, scroll down. Recipients of the grants will get 13 times as much funding as the average public school student. What?
I just told you that they spend $13,600 per child per year, and so that's we're kind of doing this on the fly. But
It's just a lawsuit. It's just a lawsuit. It's if it wins, we'll spend more time worrying about it. All right. So even as all this stuff is happening, we talked before about how micro schools are being fostered by this failure to reopen in the regular way. We're also seeing stories this week, though, about even kind of what we'll call regular private schools having massive surge in interest. And there's a Minnesota story about that. And again, traditional media, you could say mainstream media. Minnesota private schools see spike in interest fueled by uncertainty around public school opening. And they talk about a Catholic school where the phones have been ringing far more than usual. And it says parents are anxious about the coming school year, hoping for a more definitive answer than public schools are ready to provide. That's the first thing they want to know, says Principal Bruce Richards. Do we plan to open? And I think a whole bunch of them are answering that question, yes. And so that's kind of moving there.
And another related story that I forgot to put into the notes is that Nebraska just reported a couple of days ago, because homeschool families have to go onto the government website to file as homeschoolers. They're up from the same time last year, 21% of the amount of homeschoolers that have filed this year relative to last year. So 21% is a large amount. And it's because of this uncertainty around the public schools reopening.
All right. We have another link featuring the great Corey DeAngelis, actually. This is PolitiFact. Yeah. This is number 5 in the notes.
This is amazing.
Corey.
This is a pretty interesting story, isn't it?
So we talked about this on the last show. Trump had been in the Rose Garden giving kind of a campaign speech, and we showed the clip of it, of him saying this. Joe Biden wants to end school choice. What he was technically talking about was the Washington, D.C. voucher program, which is correct, that Joe Biden does want to end that school choice program. The question is whether the phrasing of Joe Biden wants to end school choice implies something larger than Biden had proposed. And PolitiFact calls this mostly false, calls the president mostly false on them, quoting a couple people, including
Andre
Senor DeAngelis.
Well, let me give you the backstory before I show you the quote, because so they got a couple other people, including Brookings, Andre Perry, who we've talked about on the show a couple of times already, where he had pretty much accused all school choice supporters to be promoters of racism, which is absolutely not true. But they quoted him, and he went into this, and they went back and forth with me on email a couple of times, and here's what I told them. I gave them maybe this much.
I know what you're framing this, because what you're actually quoted saying is not your normal sound.
Yeah, so here we go. I gave him I gave him everything Joe Biden has said against school choice about, he voted against the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program in 1997. The Biden-Sanders task force calls to end that same program. And I gave him all of the stuff about regulating charter schools, the clip at the Teachers Union
Betsy
Forum.
DeVos's whole notion of charter schools will be
if
gone.
If I'm president, charter schools essentially are gone. He said something along those lines. I gave him that. I gave him a whole bunch of quotes from the Network for Public Education.
Okay. All right.
I gave him
accept, yes. You're embarrassed about what they quoted, aren't you? You're trying to be like, hey, everybody.
I'm not embarrassed, but I want everybody to see what I gave them versus what they quoted. And that's not it, though. I also gave them tons of more information. And I said,
we
look,
get it. We understand.
I said it's ambiguous. It depends on what he meant by Biden wants to end school choice. Did they mean private school choice? Did he mean all school choice? Did he mean what did he mean? So here's my quote. Corey DeAngelis, he's at the Libertarian Cato Institute and Reason.
Yeah, no, pull it up. We want to see.
I'm reading it without it being up. Go. Here's all that they put. Did Trump mean school choice, all school choice, private school choice, or school choice for some families? DeAngelis said it would have been more accurate for him to say something like Biden wants to end some forms of school choice or Biden wants to limit school choice. So they took out all the context of about me saying like, well, if Trump was thinking about this video, of course, that's what he was thinking about.
Right. We understand. It's okay. I think we all understand. All right, let's move on because we're kind of out of time on our official hour. Let's move quickly. Our friend Chris Stewart was interviewing former Obama Education Secretary Arne Duncan on Chris Stewart's live stream. Arne Duncan said something that made me sit up and notice. I kind of think it's something amazing. And let's play that clip and then we'll chat.
This is where there's a paternalism or something that is just so deeply disturbing. And to pass kids along and say they're doing okay when they're not, to give them a high school diploma and then have them unable to take college level class in college, have to take all remedial classes and burn through Pell Grants and loans. It's interesting. My friend, the former mayor of Minneapolis, Betsy Hodges, wrote a really deep article about what white liberals have done to hurt people and to hurt communities. And I just put this exactly, right in that category. And so we have to know the truth. We have to tell kids the truth. For me, it's always about not just passing kids through, which just all it does is set them up for failure, as you know better than anybody. It's always about high expectations, but now more than ever before, high supports with that. And again, not just academic supports, food supports, social emotional supports in terms of time, supports in terms of technology.
It's a long clip, but I wanted to show the full context. Note what you just heard. Former Obama education secretary saying white liberals have supported policies like social promotion that pass kids along who have not learned the material they're supposed to learn to give them high school degrees that make them think they're qualified for college coursework or careers, and they're actually not. And make no mistake, this is a man who is absolutely against Trump. He thinks Trump re-election would be a disaster for America. So this is not, a man who suddenly embraced the right. Nevertheless, he is an Obama education secretary blaming white liberals for the social promotion policies in traditional public schools. What did you think about that, Corey?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to say the least. I have a tough relationship with our mixed views on, the passing kids through the system, essentially. I don't know what the rule is supposed to be. Is it supposed to be more rigorous or less rigorous? I would like for people to be getting a good education, one, but then also I don't want them to be stuck in schools and repeating years several times. So I don't know what the balance is, but I know that the families should have that decision.
All right. What I tweeted out was like, these kinds of themes were 10 years ago. Arnie Duncan was saying things like this, like concern over social promotion. He just wasn't using this level of strident language, and I wish he had. That's what I said about it. Things, that kind of language, white liberals hurt people, through policies like this, is language that he was not using 10 years ago when he was education secretary. But let's move on. We have an exciting update on politics from Corey on item number 7 in the rundown.
What is this?
I wrote.
This is my idea. I haven't read this.
I said people are pretty excited about the presidential campaign. By that, I don't mean Trump or Biden, but the West campaign. That's right, everyone. And this is not the Kanye West presidential campaign. Is not just from a man who did not go who's just only a college dropout. I guess I'll put it that way. He has a PhD. So for those interested in the education platform of, if you're thinking of voting West 2020.
I didn't know about this. Oh, this is from 2015.
Yeah. So that's, So we're talking about a Dr. Kanye West. And so this, I think, solidifies his education credentials for those viewers who might be considering maybe a large cash donation to the West campaign, or some kind of ground level shoe leather support.
Well, he did tweet something. Recently where he said, West 2020, but he also said maybe 2024. So it seems like, I don't know.
And there's also that press conference. People say, it's there's a bipolar thing, and Kim Kardashian has then tweeted concerned about that. So we should be careful about that. But anyway, I was like, oh, look, he has an honorary PhD. That's kind of funny. Anyway, I also wanted to quickly cover something else that I talked about before, which is this issue. People on a previous show, in fact, it was a clip that we tweeted out at Choice Media. I was saying there have been studies in the past that show asymptomatic positive COVID-19 patients actually don't transmit the virus as had been expected. Well, now we have this study saying middle and high schoolers can spread coronavirus. And what it goes on to say is it actually differentiates between if you're below 10 years old or over 10 years old. This says children between 10 and 19, those ages, can spread the coronavirus at least as effectively as adults. If you're younger than 10 years old, then you're half as likely as adults to spread the virus. It says And so this is a study out of South Korea. I say this because the confusion had been before. The World Health Organization had said one thing and then kind of backtracked. In fact, that's a link I have there for you. This is why I was confused, everybody, in what I'd said before on this program. They had originally said the term very rare for asymptomatic transmission, and we know that kids hardly get coronavirus. So when talking about reopening the schools, it's relevant to consider, well, what is the risk of kids catching the virus and then bringing it back to grandma and grandpa? And so there's this confusion, I guess. And the WHO has said both yes and no. This new study says, I guess if you're below the age of 10, you're half as likely to be a transmitter. So anyway, I just wanted to say there's more complexity than I had presented it as before. So I wanted to just issue that sort of soft correction here. Anyway,
we are over.
We're over
an hour. I think we hit all the points.
I know.
There were other points I wanted to get to.
Yeah, is there something else you wanted to wrap up with?
Real quick, states like Pennsylvania have already introduced bills. Legislators in Pennsylvania have introduced a bill called Back on Track. So kind of like what South Carolina and Oklahoma have done, where they take some of that CARES Act funding and give it to the families. Those were done by the governors. This would be done through the state legislature. And so this is a bill that would give 500,000 families in Pennsylvania some of those CARES Act funding directly so that they can use it as an ESA, as an education savings account for homeschooling expenses. They can even be enrolled in the public school and use it for online learning or microschooling or pretty much anything that's a government-approved education expenditure. So that's another update. In Maryland, Delegate Dan Cox said that he's doing a similar proposal in his state as well, similar to the Pennsylvania proposal. So there's just some more updates from states.
All right. Well, I wanted to just leave our viewers with this. I was trying to be cool this week, and I thought, I know. I'll kind of give a little colored look to the background. But then I was sloppy enough to actually leave the gel. Yeah, in that shot, you actually see the little piece of gel which is on the light to create the orange color. I was too sloppy to actually get that out of the shot. So my attempt to be cool was, not necessarily that cool. And I have Planters peanuts also. You can see there. We'll accept a advertising contribution from the Planters company if they want the product placement. Anyway, so that's it, everybody. Thanks for watching another edition of Random Assignment. Please share and like. And what do people do? They retweet. Yeah, they do that. And subscribe. Yeah.
Boom.
And we added 2 platforms. We added the Bob Bowden Twitter and the Choice Media Facebook platform this week. So looking forward to that.
Boom. Thank you so much, everybody, for hanging out with us for another week of the Random Assignment Podcast.